Hey, good morning, people. This little video is going to be about life with a neurodivergent child. Um, my son is neurodivergent, and we're going to talk about that just a little bit. But it came to mind to me this morning because where I live in the States, my kids are going back to in-person school today, which they are super excited about. But with that comes some stress, especially with children that have anxiety or children that are neurodivergent. So several days in advance, I've tried to prep both kids about them going back to school. So my son is the one that typically has issues, and we've talked, and I think he's good. But some of the things that I have to deal with James, his name's James is a very literal child, and I think that comes with his neurodiversity, which is fine. It's fine. You just have to learn how to read him. He's actually very, very funny. He has a different sense of humor that catches people off guard sometimes. And then they're like, oh, that was really funny. This kid's funny. And actually his teachers told me this the other day. We had a 504 meeting about James, and they all commented about how funny he is. James is very intelligent. On top of being literal, I know that can be a setback sometimes, and he's almost literal to a fault. And it's not a fault, I don't know a good word. There's nothing broken about him. He's just wired differently. But for example, this morning, the sitter that used to keep my kids, wonderful sitter, posted a conversation between my daughter, my son, and my daughter's best friend when they were little. And she was talking with them, and one of the kids said, Jesus is the Son of God. And James, and this was probably 2 or 3-year-old James, says, you know what that means, don't you? God's the moon. And they're like, no, not that, son. James is still that literal, still that literal. But he's also so gifted in things like math. The kid can multiply decimal points in his head and scored on a high school level when he was in 5th grade in mathematics. You're just wired differently. You're just wired differently. You think of things differently. James is also very picky with the things that he eats. Not that he doesn't like to try new things, he's skeptical. So if something's new and he's not tried it before, or if it looks different, he's hesitant. And I would say it's been about a month ago, but I cooked something, and James came in the kitchen, and he's like shoveling food on his plate, and he said, Mom, thank you so much for cooking something that's actually edible. And I stopped there for a second, and I'm like, is he throwing shade at me? I mean, what? Because typically, the first thing that would have came in my mind is that was just rude. But when you think of children with neurodiversity, sometimes they're just literal. They're just literal, and not all neurodiversity children are the same. But I've come to learn with my child, I have to wait sometimes before I respond so I can understand how he meant something to be. So I looked at James, and I was thinking, okay, was he being rude, or was he actually trying to pay me a compliment? And when I looked at James, I could see the excitement on his face, because it was a food that he knows he likes, that he eats often, and I had cooked it for him. And he was so excited to eat that. When I give him new food, a lot of times I'll insist that he's had it before and he liked it. Or we have a rule in our house that you have to at least take a bite before you tell me you don't like it. And that's helped a lot. Just an extra second of patience with some of these kids, or even adults, could just be great for them. This week, James had some zeros and some really low scores roll in on his middle school reading, and they've been working off Google Classroom. I'm like, James, what's happened here? He's like, I don't have middle school reading. Yes, you do have middle school reading. No, I don't. I said, pull up your Google Classroom and show me right now that you don't have middle school reading. He's like, Mom, I don't have middle school reading. I'm like, I'm looking at your schedule. You have middle school reading. No, I don't. So we get on there. There's no middle school reading on Google Classroom. I email the teacher. It's their middle school enrichment class. Now that she's responded back to me, I remember that's what it was. And thank you, teachers, for being so patient with us parents. You guys are amazing. I've worked in the school system. This year has just been crazy for a lot of people, but you teachers out there, God bless you. So once she responded to me, I remembered, oh yeah, well, James, literal child, it did not say middle school reading. He does not have middle school reading. So when I came home, we had a discussion. This is your enrichment. This is your enrichment. Sometimes it's math, sometimes it's reading. You're doing, oh yeah. And then we sat down, and that hang up there was, he had several big paragraphs to read. And I work during the day, so he's at home trying to do this stuff himself. So it just took me sitting beside him, making him slow down. Hundreds. Just patience, time. Sometimes they need a little longer to process. Don't think that they are trying to be rude. Take a second. James is actually a very sensitive kid, and he'll be a sensitive adult. He cares what other people think about him. But those are some of the things there. Depending on, let me take that back. If you need a good example of what life with being neurodiverse is, you need to watch Hannah Gadsby's Douglas. Hannah Gadsby is an Australian comedian who happens to be autistic. And then in her Douglas, she gives the best breakdown of what life is with autism when she talks about being in grade school and her relationship with a penguin in a box. And that's all I'm going to say. It's like halfway to 3/4 way through her comedy special. Watch it. So James is not autistic, but depending on what psychiatrist you talk to, what day of the week it is, and what lunar cycle we're in, sometimes they think of that as being on the spectrum. And whether he's on the spectrum or not, I don't care. All I cared about was learning ways to help my kid. But those are some things that autistic people and other people on the spectrum go through. James is not autistic. James has Tourette's. And with Tourette's comes a tic disorder. And I know a lot of people hear Tourette's and they think of movies and TV where these people cuss all the time. That's actually very rare. And I hate that Tourette's has gotten that rap, because my kid doesn't do that. He does have some verbal, repetitive things that he does at times. A lot of times it's little noises that he makes. Every now and then it's been a word. But his is mostly facial things. We've had a new one where James has pulled his hair out with this school stuff. It was like right when they went back to school the first time, and even though he didn't seem stressed, he obviously was. And that's just some of the things we deal with. So if you have a neurodiverse person in your life, just be a little patient, take a little extra time. I promise you, they're not trying to be rude, and they're wired differently, and there's a lot of beauty in the way that these people are wired. James just thinks of things in a totally different light than most people, and I think that's a good thing. That's a good thing. I think there's a purpose for that whenever Jay finds his niche, and I can almost guarantee it's going to have something to do with math, science, or computers. He's going to be awesome. He's already really, really smart, and once he finds that groove, I don't worry about James. He's going to do just fine out in the world. He really will. But I just wanted to share my experience of life with someone who is neurodiverse. So I hope you listen to this, and maybe if you have someone in your life that's like that, it makes you think a little bit differently. And I'm happy to talk to anybody about um, life with a neurodiverse kid or Tourette syndrome. So if you want to talk about that, just let me know. But anyway, I hope you guys have a wonderful day. Bye.